There are many men you'll never hear from again, not because they failed, not because they vanished, but because their stories became too dangerous for a culture that worships mother and mistrusts father. There are fathers whose names no longer appear on the contact lists of their children, not because they were unloving, not because they were violent, but because they told the truth in a family system built on unspoken contracts and inherited shame. This episode is for them. There's a grief almost too difficult to articulate, to be erased not by death but distortion, to have memories overwritten by someone else's narrative, to be turned into a villain in the story you gave your life to protect. This is not mythology, this is real, and it happens every day to fathers who stood firm, to men who would not bend to the manipulation, to men who were cast aside with little dignity. Parental alienation is not a buzzword, it is a field phenomenon. It's what happens when one parent uses the relational space as a battlefield and the child or children become the prize. It is what happens when the story becomes more important than the signal, the truth, when control becomes more important than coherence, and the man, he becomes inconvenient, too steady, too sane, too sovereign. So he's removed. Sometimes directly, sometimes subtly, through withheld affection, through quiet smear campaigns, through the distortion of memory, one bedtime story after another. From the comments, I just want to keep you safe. Soon, the father becomes a ghost, present in blood, but absent from his children's lives. And when the child finally turns away, they don't turn from a man. They don't turn from their father. They turn from an illusion that someone else constructed. And what of him? What of the father who once held small hands and now has no access to the children he raised? He doesn't scream. He doesn't fight in the way others do, because to fight in that way would be to enter the distortion. So instead, he holds silently, sacrificially, with the kind of restraint that only men forged by pain understand. But that doesn't mean the ache disappears. Some nights it hits unexpectedly, when his daughter's name is whispered in a dream and he wakes reaching for a voice that no longer calls. When a son's milestone comes and goes, and he wonders if his son paused, even briefly, to think of him. There's no ceremony for the father who grieves a child still alive. No ritual for the man exiled from the most sacred post of fatherhood that he ever held. And the ache isn't loud. It doesn't scream or demand to be heard. It lingers, like a breath you're never quite allowed to release. I've known that ache. I've sat with it, walked with it, built with it, humming through my bones. But not once did I let it define me, but neither did I deny it. Because real men feel, and a real father aches for what is real, even when he's no longer allowed to hold it. I told the world my story, but you don't need to. You don't need to convince your children that you loved them. You don't need to argue your way back into their hearts, because the field remembers, and the truth, however delayed, always finds its way back to clarity. You can't force your way back into their lives, but you can be the kind of presence that no distortion can permanently erase. You don't weaponize the truth, you become the truth. You don't campaign for recognition, You stand so still that even time itself must orbit around your coherence. This path is not fair. It's not just and it's not easy, but it is sacred. Because the Father who remains steady, without access, without validation, without reward, becomes the very structure his child will one day need to lean on when the illusions fall away. And they will fall, because distortion is not sustainable over the passage of time, because eventually lies contradict themselves, because one day your child may see something that doesn't make sense, and they'll begin to ask questions. And when they do, your steadiness will be the only answer that still holds weight. There are things you'll miss. Weddings, grandchildren, late-night phone calls that never arrive. You will walk through life with an empty hand where once a small one used to fit. And still you remain, because you are not their father only when they remember you. You are their father because you never stopped being one. The sovereign man does not campaign for access. He becomes the structure that invites it. He does not collapse into bitterness. He doesn't weaponize guilt. He does not compete with distortion. He builds a field so clean that when the child is ready, they know exactly where to return, not to be rescued, but to remember. This is not about patience. This is about presence. It's not about waiting. This is about becoming. Because one day, when the echoes grow silent and the lies can no longer hold, you will be there. Not with open arms, with open structure. And they will know you never left. You simply stopped giving your signal to a game that never deserved it. You don't need to be seen. You don't need to be thanked. You don't even need to be understood. You need to stay clean. Because the Father forgotten, if he remembers himself, becomes the gravity that one day brings his children home. Welcome to The Architect Speaks.